I think we'll wait a few minutes for everybody to enter and then we'll get started. Okay, as Lucas is admitting people, I think I'll just give a little background and get us started with the program. And I did want to welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming to this program, Writing While Caregiving. I'm Cynthia Reeves. I'm a member of the board at Millay House. Millay House is who is sponsoring this program. And it's also where Jeneva Stone, who will be moderating, and I are zooming in from. You'll notice that I'm in the kitchen of Millay House with some pictures of Millay behind me. And when you see Jeneva, you'll see she's in the living room as well. Edna St. Vincent Millay was born here back in 1892. And from that point until 2015, the house slowly fell into disrepair. And in 2015, a group of motivated neighbors and friends raised the funds to save this house from demolition. And so by 2023, we had completely restored the house. And at that point, we initiated a program of literary programs such as this one, both hybrid, virtual, and in person. And we also have a series of residencies. Right now, we also are running our membership drive. That is how we sustain the house, maintain the house, along with some benefactors. And people who are members uh, enjoy a number of benefits, one of which is free admission to these programs and advance notice of our programs. And there's also a wonderful newsletter that comes out twice a year called First Fig that contains a wealth of really interesting articles that's edited by one of our board members. Millay House also sponsors three different residency programs. The first is a juried residency where two writers of any genre are selected for a month at the house, along with a $1,200 stipend. There's also the Maine Coast Writers Retreat, where writers can rent the house. Up to two writers, again, of any genre, can rent the house for a modest fee. And new this year is a residency that's sponsored for poets only by the Camden Festival of Poetry, which is held every May. And that will also be a juried residency. In fact, the application period, if anyone is interested, is open until the end of the month. And the selected poet will get to stay here in May of next year and participate in the Camden Festival of Poetry, which happens in the middle of the month, and also get a small travel stipend. I have links in the chat for those of you who are interested in more information about any of that. And now I'd like to introduce the program for the evening. Writing and caregiving often exist in tension and in conversation with each other. Whether planned or unexpected, short-term or lifelong, caregiving shapes how we live, work, and create. The challenge of sustaining a creative practice alongside caring for children, elders, or loved ones with disabilities is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. This panel brings together a diverse group of writer caregivers to share experiences, strategies, and insights from the intersection of caregiving and creativity. Jeneva Stone will guide us in a discussion of issues and concerns related to this topic. I met Jeneva about 20 years ago at the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson. And ever since I've been following her on social media, she has prolific and thoughtful posts about the difficulties that she faces in her life, and also the joys that she faces with her advocacy work. Geneva combines her advocacy work with poetry, essay, and opinion writing, which has been widely published. She's the recipient of fellowships from MacDowell, Millay Arts, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Geneva became an advocate because her son Rob's goal, as he transitioned from high school to adult disability services, was to become an advocate for disability rights, healthcare, and rare disease. She is more or less his assistant. The two volunteer for several healthcare and disability rights groups at the state and federal levels, including Little Lobbyists, a family-led organization advocating for the healthcare needs of children with complex medical needs and disabilities, as well as the National Organization for Rare Disorders as Maryland ambassadors. In addition, Geneva serves on Maryland's Rare Disease Advisory Council. Before I turn the program over to Geneva, I just had two housekeeping notes. First, Geneva and the panelists have assembled an incredible resource guide that is also available in the chat. It not only contains resources for writer caregivers, but it also has a sample of each panelist's writing and a longer bio than we'll be able to share online tonight. Second, as the program unfolds, please feel free to type any questions you might have in the chat, and there'll be several periods during the night where we will engage those questions. So now I'm going to turn the program over to Geneva.
Hi, everybody. So as Cindy said, tonight we'll alternate readings from panelists with discussions on 4 topics that are pertinent to the lives of writer caregivers: time constraints, preserving a sense of self, advocacy versus creativity, and ethics. So in her feminist manifesto, A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf wrote, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write." So tonight we'll consider what caregivers need in order to write and make art. Our panelists are in alphabetical order. Sandra Beasley is the author of many books, including Made to Explode, a book of poetry, and Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, Tales from an Allergic Life, a disability memoir. She lives in Washington, D.C., where she provides care for her spouse, as well as herself, a person with a disability. Sharon Gelman writes and edits fiction and nonfiction. She created the award-winning audiobook, Nelson Mandela's Favorite African Folktales, and is the recipient of many awards for her writing. She earned an MFA from Warren Wilson College and is working on her first novel, which is taking approximately forever. Sharon is a caregiver for her father. Melissa McKinstry, who hosts poetry and jazz evenings and curates a community poetry in San Diego. She holds an MFA from Pacific University and was the inaugural writer-in-residence at the Millay House Rockland. In 1996, Melissa's son, Charlie, was born with an undiagnosed genetic disorder and required full care from birth. With a loving family and care community, Charlie lived 26 years. He passed away in 2022. Grace Spulak is a writer and attorney based in New Mexico. She is the author of the novel Magdalena is Brighter Than You Think, winner of the 2025 Autumn House Press Rising Writer Prize, and that will be available in 2026. And I'm not sure when pre-orders start, but maybe Grace can let us know. And I lost my place. Her work was awarded Witness Magazine's 2021 Literary Award in Fiction and has appeared widely in literary journals. Grace has been a caregiver to 2 siblings and identifies as a disabled person as well. Brian Trapp is Director of Disability Studies at the University of Oregon, where he also teaches creative writing. He's the author of Range of Motion His work, that's a novel, his work has been published widely. Brian was a family caregiver for his twin brother, Dan, who passed away in 2011. And he's also a caregiver for his spouse, who has a disability. Finally, Faith Holsaert is unable to join us tonight due to a minor health issue. But let me tell you about her as well, because you should read her book. Faith began her work for social and racial justice as a student in the 1950s. Her memoir, Ma Lineal, a memoir of race, activism, and queer family, features her life as the mother of a beloved adult daughter with a mental health disorder in the context of Faith's activism. So you can read an excerpt from that in the author and resource guide. So we miss you, Faith, if you were able to make it on. Okay, and closed captioning is available for anyone who would like to use it. So please turn it on at your convenience. And we'll get started by listening to Melissa read from her work.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here with Cynthia, Geneva, our tech artist, Lucas, and these wonderful panelists. And this panel, sponsored by the Millay House Rockland, is a topic that's so dear to me. About 10 years ago, while I was caregiving and writing and working on an MFA, I was introduced to Jane Hirschfield's collection of essays called 10 Windows. And one essay in particular really made an impression on me. It was called Uncarryable Remainders, Poetry and Uncertainty. In this essay, Jane says that anxiety, grief, and the abysses of chaos can be lured into beauty and meaning, and into the freedom such transmutation itself brings is no small part of literature's power. An ongoing question for my own reading and writing as a caregiver has been, how do we pull off this alchemy? How do we lure chaos into meaning and maybe even into beauty? Jane's essay led me to try. So this first poem I'm going to read is one I wrote about a daily ritual with my son, Charlie, that was both challenging and beautiful. It's called Showering My Son. Now over 100 pounds, your soft body like the lead drape a technician places before an x-ray, like Titian's Venus of Urbino, white and pink, sans all that hair, sans the sentience in the eyes. Every day for almost 24 years, my arms under your shoulder blades and knees, I scoop you out of bed, pivot you to the blue mesh chase on wheels. Your 3 stomata, a constellation, from throat to belly to bladder. Oh, the way plastic meets the flesh. Our little mystery, our science experiment, our boy. Let us wheel to the shower now. I'll sluice warm water over your chest, little tuft of hair. I'll lift each arm and rinse your musky man odor. I'll soap your groin, your legs, and your rocker bottom feet with those toes crossed for good luck. I'll shampoo your hair, a sort of translucence. I'll shave your chin, press a warm cloth gently to each eye, the whorl of each ear, the nape of your neck under the trach tie, and then the swaddle of towels, the wheeling back to bed, and will become after the bath by Degas, the hairbrush and the awkward limbs. I'll lotion your knobby knees, thin shins, each little finger that has never held anything. I'll fluff your pillow, cover you with your soft old blanket, read you a poem. I'll be Frank O'Hara, made for the lunchtime ritual of the city, made for kangaroos, aspirins, beachheads, and beers. These things are with us every day, he says, made for the daily touch, for the reminder. You really are beautiful, he says. Because I mothered a child who was disabled and medically complex, I also sought other poets who shared this same uncertainty. One of these, Danusia Lamaris, showed me how a poem can convey experience without self-pity or sentimentality. Her poetry showed me the power of letting carefully selected detail hold emotion. After visiting a touring exhibit of Georgia O'Keeffe's work, artifacts from her life and studio, details of her life, helped me write the next poem I'll read. And this is titled Late Spring Epiphany after the Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit. I'm always trying to paint that door. I never quite get it, she said, of the black square at her winter house in Abiquiu. Always a shadow shifting, a ladder leading to sky. When she looked through a pelvic bone she picked up in the desert, she saw a ghost moon. And today I'm quiet as her bones and stones and black pearl oyster shells. Once I had a son. Once, when he was 4, before his tracheotomy, we were invited to float in a warm therapy pool. He was weightless as I swirled his thin limbs in slow circles and lines. He seemed to sleep through it all, but I loved it. His buoyancy, absence of straps and wheels, water flicker on his curly lashes, maybe a quiver of smile. He couldn't say more or or get me out of here. So I don't really know. I never really knew him. He kept himself to himself, maybe grew very small to survive. He was a dark door, a box of bones, a soft, gone tabernacle. The form of ekphrasis was a gift for me in this poem. It invited me to be in Abiquiu and Ghost Ranch and the world of O'Keeffe's paintings, her obsessions, in order to explore details of my own. And this returns me to Jane Hirschfield's essay that I started with this evening, Poetry and Uncertainty. One more quote from her that I'll close on. Jane said, "To exchange certainty for praise of mystery and doubt is to step back from hubris and stand in the receptive, both vulnerable and exposed." Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of our conversation together this evening.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was beautiful. I really enjoyed hearing you read these poems that I've only, read on the page. So now we'll hear from Sharon. Take it away.
Hi, I'm going to read a brief piece of nonfiction. It's a kind of fragmented, braided thing. Let me start. 1A. This morning I spotted a creature standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, rust-colored fur the size of a small dog. Yet even from a distance, I could see the electricity shuddering just beneath its skin, a kind of taut wildness that disappears with domesticity. B. For years now, I've lived in the West, in places that once were desert, where the air is dry and the bugs are few, and no one cares quite so much if you graduated from one of the Ivies. Sometimes I return east in August and bemoan the muggy air, the sweat sluicing down my spine. I bat away the gnats encircling my head like an aura of flittering dirt. But mid-Atlantic summers have their charms. The fecund earth covered in living green velvet and fireflies. Each time I see one of those tiny illuminated creatures, I am transported back to the early years of my life when the entire world was ruled by magic. C. The things we truly want, we cannot buy on eBay. The wisdom we possess as adults, housed in the relentlessly firm bodies of our teenage selves. Another conversation with our now dead mother. A world whose leaders have our best interests at heart. All the cashmere scarves in the world, even at deeply discounted prices, cannot give us that. 2A. I do not have any chickens in my yard, nor a small child playing in a sandbox. For me, a fox is not a threat. It is simply untamable beauty disappearing back into the woods. B. It's not just that a firefly is a delicately winged life with a body that lights up. although if you really think about that, those facts are mind-boggling. It is also the precise color of a firefly's minuscule light, that strange luminescence that exists nowhere else in nature, except perhaps for lichen hidden away on the walls of bottomless caves, or small life forms found down deep in the ocean, or in other far-off places I have never been. See, I held your hand that night after we lifted you into bed. You lay there listening to Rachel Maddow and struggling for breath, your chest rising, catching, falling as your oxygen machine clicked and whooshed. The light of the TV screen flashed through your bedroom while something passed between us, silent and sacred. 3A. 40 years ago, this neighborhood was new, every home recently constructed, the old trees chopped down, new lawns unfurled, foliage freshly planted. I used to think of this place with its saplings all the same age as a tree orphanage. Decades have passed, and those saplings have grown large, their hefty boughs shading subdivision streets like elegant, old-fashioned boulevards. Yet amidst this manicured suburban enclave, beyond the personal property lines, there are a few small wooded pockets with underbrush grown thick, secret places, once again feral enough to house a fox and the wild things a fox might eat. B. I have only ever seen that strangely dazzling color in small containers of day-glow paint on blacklight posters and in a million tiny parts of items sold at Toys R Us. Things I left behind in childhood and am reminded of now only in real moments by the unearthly glow of a firefly. C. I imagined the vein forests of your lungs opening, allowing in more air. I begged your arteries to widen, your blood cells to please ferry more oxygen. It seemed like your body had just nodded its assent when you lifted my hand to your lips and kissed my open palm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It was really beautiful. I liked all the mixing of the different settings, and so much like life, so many contrasts, right? So let's move on to our first discussion with Melissa and Sharon. This is dealing with time constraints. For us writers, caregiving can present some unique challenges. In particular, finding the time to write when chaos, frankly, can erupt at any moment. As for me, I never know exactly when life will go sideways. So the typical writerly advice to set a schedule and establish routines always rings hollow to me, I have to say. So what about the two of you? What are your time management strategies, and how do you bank the embers of your creativity when there frankly is no time to write? Anyone call out first dibs, or should I call on somebody? Melissa.
Well, I've thought a lot about this panel and this topic as we've been preparing for it. And, I think the cleanest way to explain it is to say that my main time management strategy is really a shift of perspective. And that is that I think of my writing as an ongoing daily exercise in paying attention, in noticing, in asking, what might this be the beginning of? I read and write whenever I'm able to each day, not on any particular schedule. The poet John Keats said, "Uproar is your only music." And I say, learn to dance to it, because even in a 10 to 15 minute increment of time in a waiting room, I can pull out a pocket notebook or the notes app on my phone and use voice recording, even if I can't get to the pencil, and record impressions, details, images, even a bit of dialogue. And I capture that fleeting thought and hold it like a little love note to my writer self to say, you'll get back to this, it'll come around, and then there is time eventually to sit with an extended period of time and take those details and images and begin to weave a longer piece with them. So this main shift in perspective I'm suggesting, I hope might be of help to others who are actively caregiving is to allow the whole day to essentially be a writing exercise and to capture what you're able when you're able so that you can return to it. I have a few other thoughts too, but I'll stop there and let Sharon chime in. See her.
Thanks, Melissa. I think similar to both of you, schedules are not my friend in this way. My approach is to write or revise or brainstorm, even if it's a paragraph, a page, one idea. I try to do that as close to every day as possible. I often take off one day a week. That's just so I don't schedule that in advance either. It's like when the day is just too brutal, I'm like, I give myself a pass without guilt. And I slip it in wherever I can. Sometimes when I first wake up, sometimes when my dad is napping, sometimes before I go to sleep. It varies based on the day, and sometimes it is literally 5 minutes of time. But I think my biggest ally in this is triage. I start my day with my to-do list, and I always put writing on the top, and it often gets just keeps moving down through the day as things emerge. But I try to think of it as a need to do, not a want to do. But it again, like my father was just got released from the hospital. During the time he was hospitalized, I gave myself a pass. It was like sleeping became a bigger priority when I could do it, talking to his doctors. So I mean, I think first and foremost is to give ourselves grace, to know that writing is a lifelong pursuit. And while I try to do it every day because that keeps me in the sensation of being a writer, it makes me feel like I actually am a writer. Writing makes me feel like a writer. I also recognize that life intervenes, and this is a marathon and not a sprint. And living our lives with love and in service to others ultimately makes us better human beings. And it also, I think, makes us more empathetic. And that, at the end of the day, to me, is what makes good writers even better.
Oh,
Yeah,
I so agree.
yeah. And this is all so heartening for me to hear right now, because I think there are probably people on this call who can empathize with this. I am coming off, I think, the worst writing year of my life, the worst non-writing year of my life. And I've had periods like this before, where like one thing after another, and it started right around this time last year when Robert's entire private duty nursing schedule like completely fell apart. And we were up all night, we were up all day, we were exhausted, like everything went out the window, and it took months and months and months to get back to a place where that was stable again. And then, of course, advocacy. Robert and I are Medicaid advocates and advocates for people with disabilities. And that part of our world and support system is frankly in crisis. So yeah, you sit there and you're like, okay, we got to save Medicaid Day. We got to keep pushing this. So things have kind of dropped away, but I definitely feel what Sharon was saying, and Melissa as well. You just really have to believe in yourself, and you have to say, yes, this is still part of my core identity. I will get back to it. I think one of the techniques that I use is to go through the week ahead of time, identify a day when I can just shut everything out, set my phone, turn my phone off, do not disturb completely. And, if anything is like bleeding or on fire, someone will come and knock on my door and say, hey, there's blood, there's fire, you need to come out. So that's kind of the way I reboot myself after long periods like this. And it's the way that I'm rebooting myself here. Another 4 days to like make a plan going home. And Melissa, you said you had some other thoughts.
Well, I just wanted to add something that is, I think, a compliment to both of you and to so many caregivers who are, either still working in a separate vocation or an art, but that as caregivers, I think we become such expert at improvisation. You know, we're always figuring out how to adapt equipment, adapt schedules, adapt a physical space, a communication device, whatever it is, you know, that we're doing. And I think part of what we've just demonstrated in this part of the panel is that we can also be improvisational writers, and we figure out how to adapt and how to make the writing happen around everything else that needs to happen. And one thing that my mentor, Ellen Bass, recently reminded me of is, you know, Melissa, when you're participating in things, it's not about you, it's about the writing, because somebody out there needs to hear the poem or the short story or the nonfiction piece, the essay, the advocacy piece that you're working on today. Somebody out there needs it. So I think also that there is this belief in ourselves, in our mission, in what we're doing, and then also that there's an audience out there who may find some kind of solace, hope, you know, advice in a piece that we managed to get out there. So as by way of encouragement to keep trying.
I love that.
Sharon, you,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, writing is a form of caregiving. I don't know how many people here, but I imagine every writer feels it in some way or another that our lives have been saved by somebody else's writing. And for me, that's kind of at the core of why I write, is to hope to, you know, pay it forward. I just want to give a shout out to the idea of accountability groups. I found that really helpful. There's a thing called the grind that I often do. Sometimes I do it with friends. I have a critique group that we have a Slack chat, and even when no one else is reporting in on what they're writing, I find it really helpful to do that. Some months my accountability partner is an old friend who's actually a visual artist, and we just email each other whatever we've done that day with no expectation that the other person is even going to look at it. Certainly no expectation or desire for the other person to critique it, but just as a way to report in. And for me, that little bit of external pressure, oh, I have to get my grind in by midnight, I have to tell my group, I have to tell my friend, just moves it up a notch. It becomes a partnership, and the part of me that is very I think as caretakers we become very much about the bond, and that gives me a way to kind of contextualize my writing process as part of, like you were saying, sort of my service to others. I'm accountable to them, they're accountable to me. So I just want to put that out. And for people who have never done this, also there there is support out there. I mean, I live in a really blue county, and it's not perfect, but my county has respite care in certain instances. We found a group that did that, and that's been helpful. You know, there are funds in some states, in some counties, foundation grants, and also, you know, honoring our writing enough that it's worth saying to a family member or a friend or a caregiver, could you come over for this amount of time? Could you stay this amount of time so that I can, um, you know, have a little time to do my writing or my editing or speak on a panel? And I find that when I sort of respect that part of my life is essential, other people are often willing to respond in that, you know, and to that, and don't question that it's
Yeah.
essential for me.
Yeah, really well said.
yeah,
Yes.
fantastic. I'm looking to Cynthia to keep time. So I don't know if we're
It's 7:00,
okay.
7:05.
Okay. So,
Yeah, in the chat.
oh, are there any questions in the chat?
No.
Okay. Anyone out there have a comment they want to make or question or anything? It's okay. So I definitely want to second Sharon's accountability ideas. I too participate in the grind periodically when I feel like I have the bandwidth to do it that month. And to be honest, what I typically do is I've developed this way of writing like brief prose poems Some of them hit the mark, some of them suck. And, every night, I sit down and typically we're all watching TV and I'll see something that strikes me on TV, in the room, some thought I had during the day, and I'll just try to write one interesting sentence and follow it with another interesting sentence. And then, sometimes something comes of that, something sparks. And other times it's like, but there's another accountability workshop that's in the handout. With the grind, the way that you join the grind, if anyone's interested, is you need to be invited through someone else who has been in the grind. And you need to fully commit to all 30, 31 days of the month. And like I said, there's no critique. It's just accountability. You just send it in. So Sharon and I both do that. And if there's anyone who's interested in joining, I have my author website. It's in the bio, and Sharon, I'm not sure Sharon's got a way to contact her, but you can definitely reach out and ask us if you can join, and we can hook you up if you're serious. So I think we should probably, Sharon, you had anything to add, or?
Well, just one other hot tip.
Okay.
Someone turned me on recently to the app Speechify. It can read your work to you. And so there are times, my favorite part is when I read the opening of my novel and it says, freedom does not fall from the sky, a novel by Sharon Gelman. It sounds so real and official. But what it helps me to do is to be able to, when I'm cooking, when I'm walking, when I'm driving the car, when I'm doing anything other than interacting with my father or any of the other people who help caregive him, it lets me tune in to my work as a listener, which often sparks new ideas, edit ideas. So I imagine it's similar for poetry. I mean, the reading is less than perfect, but it still gives you a way to experience your work in another way. So just a thought, especially if you're a prose writer, to check it out.
Wonderful. So thank you both so much for your insights and for your reading. And we'll move along to the next panel, which is dealing with time constraints. And before we get into a discussion, we will listen to, we'll hear Grace read from her work. I'm looking forward.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to read the beginning of a short story from my collection, Magdalena is Brighter Than You Think. It's out in April 2026. It is available for pre-order, so you can do that on bookshop.org or wherever you might want to pre-order books. And so this story is about some of the ways that our society unfortunately deprioritizes caregiving and fails to kind of offer support and really put some limitations even on who gets to be a caregiver and who is thought of as an appropriate caregiver. So this story is called Maybe It Wasn't You. It was 3 o'clock and Aurelie had 2 investigations left before she could go home. She'd put them off for days, and now she had no choice. She was up against a deadline. She would have to leave the finger-stained walls of the room that doubled as her office and the family visit space and go see these children. She drove through the uneven streets, broken asphalt lined with equally broken trailers, roofs half blown away, windows patched with plywood or black plastic. The first place was a trailer on the south end of town, with blue siding and a gray terrier who barked half-heartedly from under the dead cottonwood, a place Aurelie had been 6 times before to talk to a pair of sullen 8-year-old twin boys who, despite their assorted bruises, swore they were fine. She knocked on the door. She tried to look like she had some authority when the mother, a woman named Jennifer Richter, opened it and glared at her. "You again," she said. She tossed her cigarette butt onto the stoop, close to Aurelie's foot, and stomped it out. "I don't know why you people won't leave me alone." "We got another call about your kids." Those stupid words that Aurelie had been taught to say. Nothing more, never who had called. That was anonymous. "Talk to them all you want," Jennifer Richter said. It'll be the same as last time. One of the boys, Aurelie could never tell them apart, sat at the dirty kitchen table, peeling green vinyl from the tabletop, while his mother smoked, supposedly out of earshot, in the backyard. "How are you doing?" Aurelie said. The boy kicked the legs of his chair and said viciously through his teeth, "Whatever my mom says is the truth." His brother refused to say anything at all to Aurelie. Aurelie saw no marks on either of them this time. She didn't know what else she might ask, whether to take some action, what action she might take. Sometimes the action was to call the police and take the children. Sometimes she sent people to parenting classes. Sometimes nothing. There was no guide that Aurelie could find for when to do which thing. In social work school, there had been a lot of talk about active listening and natural supports, but out in the field, those words were quickly taken by the wind, spit, scattered. Aurelie didn't want to take some action because it would force her to take a side. She was afraid to take a side. She left the twins with their mother, though she knew she'd be back. Another call would come, their teacher, their grandmother, the next-door neighbor. There were endless people who called about the twins. Aurelie had been a social worker for 2 years, and she thought, when she chose this course of study, that she might be good at it. She had her own childhood as experience. Apartment walls riddled with bullet holes, crack pipes on the floor, the glassine, the vials. But she realized, still in school, that being a social worker would only remind her of how miserable she'd always been. She could have changed majors, done some other thing. The fact that she didn't likely showed some irresponsibility, some deep flaw. But she didn't believe that she could change, either herself or this path she'd set herself on. The scrim of classes, practicums, pretending to care about the problems of the mess-stinking people who sat in plastic chairs across the student practice table from her. So she graduated after 4 years with a social work degree. And then she had to pay her student loans or find someone who would pay them for her, which meant the state, which meant working in a tiny nowhere town. She took a job in Circumstance, 60 miles up the road from Silver City and the social work school. It wasn't that Aurelie never felt guilty about how little she cared, how careless she could be with other people's lives. But what could she do for these people that would be better than what they were already doing? Aurelie didn't know how to be responsible for her own life. Forget about other people. She told herself that the children she investigated were better off without her. After all, hadn't she always lied or refused to open the door when people like her came knocking? I'll go ahead and stop there.
Thank you so much, Grace. It was wonderful and resonated so much with me, with all the different bureaucratic structures that we all go through. So thanks once again. And now, Sandra,
Yeah, hi.
love to read.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Okay, I did a little bit of a pivot because I realized as I've so admired what I've heard everyone reading so far, and I wanted to read something that really speaks to this idea of preserving a sense of self, which is something that I'm very interested in. So this is a short essay called Love in the Time of Omelets. In August 2022, I was a 42-year-old woman who didn't know the first thing about shopping for eggs. I stood in front of the grocery store's refrigerated section, peering through the door. Grade A, large, brown. I picked up a carton and cradled it into my basket. When I was a child, eggs posed a uniquely chaotic threat. My mother wasn't willing to take the risk of cooking them, though of the 4 of us, I was the only one allergic. Too many exposure points for contamination, stove and sink, fork and plate. At school, the appearance of raw eggs for a science experiment was something to dread. When classmates tossed eggs as part of field day races, I stayed on the sidelines. Only hard-boiled ones were relatively safe. I felt comfortable dyeing them for Easter, sometimes taking part in my cousin's egg-knocking contests after the holiday supper. When I'd moved in with the man who became my husband, I warned him that he'd have to be okay with keeping our kitchen clear of my allergens. That list includes milk, eggs, beef, shrimp, cucumber, cantaloupe, pistachios, mango. Champneys took it all in stride. Coming off a decade of bachelor life, perhaps he wasn't used to having much in the fridge anyway. Plus, many of his favorites were foods we could share. The first dinner he ever cooked for us was salmon over wilted spinach. We collaborated on dinners of chicken and couscous, fennel and kale and tomatoes, pork sausage, and Ore-Ida tater tots with sriracha spiked ketchup. I wouldn't cure my food allergies if you offered. They're part of the ways I know myself, inquisitive, independent. Yet I cannot deny that in the grip of a reaction, I have to turn to the support system around me. When the vegan pasta served at my sister's wedding caused my eyelids and lips to swell, Champneys was the one who had to absorb my instructions, helping me weigh wanting to stay versus my safety. After the last dance, he was the one who drove our car home. I'm the one with the dramatic medical history. His health has always been stable. So when my phone rang at 5 a.m. showing his number on the other end, I didn't expect anything other than good morning. From someone forgetting the 6 hours time difference between Alaska, where I was at an artist residency, and our home in DC, but I didn't recognize the voice speaking. My husband was in the hospital with, what? Acute advanced heart failure. She'd called with him on breathing support, and within a few minutes, they updated me that they'd need to put him on ECMO, a term I only knew because of the latest season of pandemic-inspired television dramas. She referred to a potential EOL event. Does she mean end of life? You need to come here, she said, not comprehending I was 3 plane rides away. I hung up and began doing what I could do from Alaska. I called his parents to tell him they needed to fly to DC. I asked his brother to get on the train from New Jersey, and 48 hours later, I walked into the ICU in our new reality. He spent 29 days in the hospital, many of them with an Impella heart pump. The cardiogenic shock caused multiple organ failure. His liver rebounded fully, his kidneys less so. When they administered heparin, a blood thinner, the dialysis machine meant to run continuously began to sputter and jam. Turns out the husband I thought had no allergies is allergic to heparin. Now I shop for eggs. His parents are back in Florida, and we navigate appointments, phone calls, scripts for amiodarone and Entresto, labs. Some moments channel before times, putting a record on, watering the stone crops on the balcony. But his hands are colder, he is thinner. At night, when I hitch up my right leg in my sleep, what he always called my frogging pose, and move to press my calf against his hip, what I encounter instead is the battery pack to a Zoll Life Vest portable defibrillator. His cardiac diet has required us to forgo added salt. I throw away soy sauce, stick the salmon roe I bought in Alaska into the back of my closet. The renal diet is the hard part, a gauntlet of prohibitions. No tomatoes, no spinach, no lentils, no beans, no whole grains, no nuts, no seeds, no potatoes. All our favorite staples banished because of their high potassium or phosphorus. What he can eat, what his body craves, is meat and eggs. Massive amounts of protein offset the outpatient dialysis process that leaves him drained and artificially weepy. Our breakfast traditions have been Benton's bacon and lima beans, tinned sardines with thin sliced tomatoes, hash of potatoes and kale, every one of those things now vetoed by the renal diet. Even just a quick banana, handful of almonds, forbidden. Maybe, I said as soon as he came back from the hospital. I took a breath. Maybe, once I said it, I wouldn't be able to take it back. Maybe you should make omelets. He uses a designated pan that can go straight into the dishwasher, as does the spatula. He adds jalapenos, cilantro, whatever garnish we've got. Sometimes he adds crisp skin from trout we've cooked the night before. This is our era of setting the table for meals. We're used to eating on the couch because the table doubled as his desk in our small city apartment. But work is off the table for the foreseeable future. We live in the day-to-day. For breakfast, I toast small slices of sourdough bread, warm up ground turkey for myself, set out Tabasco, the lowest sodium hot sauce we've found. Napkins, forks. Sal the cat prowls at our feet looking for a handout. We listen to the conversation of ducks in the parks below and the morning announcements broadcast by the elementary school across the street, and we eat. The second or third time we did this, a little later in the morning, I found myself absentmindedly scratching at my jawline. I stopped myself and went to the bathroom. Sure enough, a hive. Just one. I washed my hands, washed my chin, debated Benadryl, decided against it. We had a dialysis bag to pack and a chair to get to, and traffic on 295 is always a crapshoot. People want to know what happened, but no one thing was the thing. He was a healthy, active 51-year-old man. What were the warning signs? Yeah, he'd had COVID-19 a few times over. First in April 2020, then in December 2021, despite vaccines and boosters. I brought it home from the university where I taught. Then he brought it home from the art handling company where he worked. Yes, he drank. Yes, he'd had a cough. The doctor had given him suppressants and a neti pot for that cough. Dental work, extra ibuprofen. Yes, an atrial fibrillation diagnosed in January and part of a family history, but the AFib had been rate controlled, seemingly innocuous, until it was weaponized as heart failure. I was supposed to get a cardiology follow-up this summer, he'd said later. He did. My husband married a woman with multiple life-threatening food allergies, yet it is his disability placard that arrived in the mail last week to hang from the rearview mirror of our car. For as long as he wears the Zoll Life vest while he's being evaluated for a pacemaker, he cannot get behind the wheel. If I have a reaction, there's no plan for who drives us home. My mother had come over and stayed for 5 days, sleeping on the couch while I was tackling a dense stretch of work. She cooked chicken wings for dinner and, at our request, layered them in spice. And the next morning when we woke up, my husband said, "What the hell?" His fingertips were streaked yellow-orange, which we recognized from when liver failure would flood his body with bilirubin. We called for a morning appointment, which led to a full blood panel. The doctor confirmed it looked like jaundice. We got to dialysis, and they took one look at his hands and laughed. Getting out an alcohol swab, they cleaned his fingertips one by one, erasing the chili powder from the night before. I want to say I laughed when this happened, and I did, but I cried when I was alone. These are the types of absurdities I'm used to in my food allergic life, but it's not my life at stake this time, it's his life, and giving care is a little different from taking care. So this is the story of a man and woman who love to cook. And for dinner, they bake chicken thighs or sear pork chops, maybe starch, definitely a vegetable. If broccolini, he'll roast it or she'll make dressing for a salad. And in the morning, he makes an omelet for himself and himself only. She knows not to kiss him until after he washes up a bit. But in the meantime, they sit at the same table, each with their own hands, and eat.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Sandra's work is just wonderful. It mixes the specific, the humorous, the empathy, the emotion. So, encourage you to look up more of her work for sure. So moving on into our conversation, preserving a sense of self. So I've been a primary caregiver for my son, Rob, for over 27 years. It's been a joy and a privilege, yet the necessary interdependence of disability and caregiving mean that for each of us, carving out our own identity and independence is hard. So I've been writing since I was 10 years old. My first piece was published in Cricket magazine, and I've struggled to maintain that identity, as well as to take care of myself, as well-meaning people are constantly telling me to do. So how do each of you navigate the shoals of self-care and care for others while caring for yourselves and holding on to your core identities?
Sure. I can go ahead and start. So for me, I guess I will just say upfront, I am a person who maybe finds a lot of traditional self-care advice not particularly relevant or helpful. So I act as a caregiver for my brother who has disabilities. I also have disabilities. And so all of that means that for me, I often am not able to do these things like step away and take a walk, or get 8 hours of sleep, or whatever these kind of self-care advice tips are. And so I guess the first thing I would say is that for me, it's about kind of understanding that a lot of the advice we get kind of as carers and even as writers, it doesn't work for everyone, and it can't work for everyone. And just to kind of echo what Melissa was saying earlier about shifting perspective, that's okay. I became disabled as an adult, and had periods of time where I really needed significant care, physical care. And in those times, actually, my identity as a writer was really important to me, and was a way for me to kind of understand myself, even as I wasn't able to physically write or to type, but this was something that I could do, and a way for me to kind of understand the way my realities were shifting. And so I think just holding on to that idea of myself as a writer, and as a writer who is writing in a way that fits my reality and the day-to-day exigencies of my life, has been really powerful for me in thinking about kind of who I am, and how am I how am I holding space for myself in times when I may not be actually physically writing, putting stuff on the page, but kind of doing work as a writer, as I'm just going about my day, noticing things, and just existing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sandra?
Yeah, I mean those are such important and powerful observations. And part of the reason why I pivoted and read what I did, even though it was a little longer than what I was originally going to read, was that it explained so much of the setup of otherwise I would need to, but basically I grew up as the one being taken care of, right? Like I grew up as a child with severe life-threatening food allergies. My mother was the caregiver. I thought I had kind of unpacked the dynamics of that relationship pretty well, particularly as part of my own journey to recognizing the disability in that aspect of the identity. And then all of a sudden, based on this, I was the one caregiving, and we have this constant, very literal reminder of it in these efforts to share meals that can accommodate everyone's needs and still be joyful and fun. And I realized early on that I was eating terribly. I was losing my sense of self because I was adapting all the things that I could no longer eat because my husband could, but I wasn't adding any of the things that I needed to stay balanced. The name of the piece I read was Love in the Time of Omelets, and I don't know yet. I've played with using it as a book title, but we'll see. And just to give an example of making that shift from keeping my sense of self, I both mean that in the good way, celebrating my sense of self, but also like checking myself in some ways as a storyteller. Because at the end of the day, I can only tell my story. And I already had lots of experience as a writer before this happened. But what I found was I was really struggling with, am I trying to tell my story, his story, a marriage story, and how much of a marriage story can I capture? So part of the reason why I've really stuck to this focus of food is that it's a way to ground myself in the day to day and not pull back into these rhetorical schemes where I kind of find myself losing my sense of self in the trope of this larger caregiving story.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We're running a little bit behind, so if it's okay with you all, we'll move on to the next thing. Is there anything else that either one of you wanted to add?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great stuff from the two of you. And any questions in the chat, Cynthia?
There's nothing in the.
Okay.
No.
All right. So before we move on to our next topic, let's hear from Brian. think Brian is going to read from his novel, which will be lovely and wonderful. It's a great book. You shall read it.
All right, thanks. I'm Brian Trapp. This is my novel came out October 15th. Took me like 10 or more years to write, so I'm excited to have it here. And it's fiction. It's a novel, but it's partly based on growing up with my twin brother Danny. And it's also based off of my experiences working as a camp counselor at a camp for people with disabilities, called Camp Cheerful, as it is in the book. And I actually got to read some of the book at the camp a couple weeks ago, so it was pretty cool to read to one of my former campers who was there. And the book is also partly based on one of my campers actually did escape at a pool party in his power chair onto a busy road. So it was cool to fictionalize that. I want to actually read this the epigraph because with Melissa's poems, I feel like it really speaks to some of that. So this is my epigraph, but it's from Juna Barnes Nightwood. I would carry that boy's mind like a bowl picked up in the dark. You don't know what's in it. He feeds on odd remnants that we have not priced. He eats a sleep that is not our sleep. There is more in sickness than the name of that sickness. In the average person is the peculiar that has been scuttled, and in the peculiar, the ordinary that has been sunk. People always fear what requires watching. So that's the epigraph. And this takes place in August 2002. It was late morning on their third day at Camp Cheerful, right before lunch, and it was unclear if Sal was having fun. Michael had prepped Sal on a beach towel under the shaded green awning. He pulled on Sal's tube socks so he wouldn't scuff his feet on the pool tiles. He fastened Sal's life vest, which was made of hard yellow foam, and framed his head, making him look as if he were in the stocks or some other very relaxing torture device. Now Sal was submerged, his head held aloft above the water. The vest made Sal so light in the pool that with Sal deep enough, Michael could let go, let Sal touch his tube-socked toes to the bottom. He could let Sal float by himself. Look at you standing, Michael said. Sal smiled just barely. Then his smile disappeared and he said it. Mama. Mama? Michael said. What do you mean, Mama? Here, forget about her. Dance with me. Michael made techno music with his mouth as he moved Sal's hands up and down. Sal's skinny legs scissored back and forth under the water. His feeding tube floated, taped shut, waggling from his belly in the pool current. Micah, Sal said. Michael leaned in, still dancing. Yeah, buddy? Mama, he said again, into his brother's face. Come on, camp isn't that bad. A little brotherly quality time, a little sibling R&R. Sal sputtered his lips. Okay, Michael said. Now you're just hurting my feelings. This was supposed to be a special place for special people. That's what the brochure said in bright balloon letters. Why Michael and Sal's mother had sent them here for the last week of summer. I'm not special, Michael told his mother, but she said, you watch your mouth. Don't you ever say that. Even though she knew full well Sal was special in the way the brochure meant. Severe cerebral palsy and mental disabilities. He could barely control his own power chair. He needed Michael, his twin, to tag along as his attendant, his escort in fun, personal hygiene, and not dying, before the brothers, age 18, went their separate ways. So far, Camp Cheerful seemed to be mostly about singing. You sang for your breakfast. You sang for your lunch. When you tried to fall asleep, good luck. Someone was singing. The morning they drove across the bridge and into camp, the very first activity was to gather around the flagpole and sing about baby sharks and a bear way up there and the spelling out of banana. The camp had a distinct feel of a cult, with lyrics designed to break the will. Sal had bunched up his lips to his incisors, made squirrel teeth, his patent look of displeasure. Michael had whispered, Where did Mom send us? And Sal caught Michael's eye like, We're in hell. The first day, the art leader, a German woman in dreadlocks, forced the campers to rub crayons over leaves to, as she said, reveal vein, until someone yelled, Ants! And everyone started slapping. The second day during nature, They tried to fish off the bridge into the creek's deep pool, using the only two functional fishing rods, but Jerry, one of their campers, ate all the bait, an entire package of hot dogs, and when someone pulled up a rod too quick, Sal almost got hot dog hooked in the face. Sal not having fun wasn't all the camp's fault. Michael was also fucking up. The first mistake Sal had found funny. Michael put Sal's AFOs, his hard plastic ankle-foot braces, on the wrong feet and had trouble stuffing them into his shoes. The braces probably hurt, but Sal seemed to enjoy Michael being an idiot much more. Sal liked less the red slashes on the tops of his ears, wrists, and knees, where Michael had missed with the SPF 50. No wonder his mother rubbed that stuff on like Sal was trying to pass as an albino. The fuck-ups continued. While Michael was scoping out possible ladies for Sal during dinner, his feeding tube catheter slipped out. Sal said Micah repeatedly, but Michael thought Sal was just doing his torture you with his name routine and ignored him until he saw the damp circle ballooning on Sal's shorts. Then, this morning, Sal was so stiff it was difficult to thread his arms through his sleeves. Michael pulled too hard, and Sal said, like, careful, I have nerve endings. And when Michael lifted Sal to his chair and Sal clicked the joystick down, nothing happened. Michael had forgotten to plug it in, so they had to sit in the cabin charging his battery while everyone else went to sing for their breakfast. Every time Michael messed up, he felt Sal was saying with a furrowed caterpillar brow, "You're incompetent. You're no replacement for Mom." And I'll just skip a little bit ahead. But there were moments when Michael was sure Sal was enjoying himself. He smiled during barn, where he pet rabbits, those beady-eyed balls of fur. He beamed during archery when they tied Sal via string to the adaptive crossbow trigger and he backed up his power chair enough to punch the arrow into the target with a thwack. And he laughed during rec when they floated up a giant parachute and Sal gunned it to the other side until the fabric softly came down and swallowed him. And Sal joy screamed yesterday in the pool when Michael raced him against Claude, helping him talk shit. "Sal is a high-octane watercraft. Do not challenge him." They played drunk boating, Sal shaking with laughter as Michael crashed him into unsuspecting swimmers, whispering, "Who should we get next? Who's in your hit list?" They also enjoyed their twin shtick, when campers and counselors would ask them if they were really twins, and Sal said, like, "I barely even know this guy." And Michael became mock outraged and put his hand to his chest and gasped like a Southern belle, "Sal, I can't believe you. That's it. I'm telling Mom." Sal laughed so hard he'd forget how to breathe, and he'd tear up and get red-faced as his chest heaved. They even started calling Michael the Aide, because if he wasn't Sal's twin, who was this guy? Sal had fun at his brother's expense, and Michael was happy to pay the bill, because for as much as Michael fucked up, he'd also gotten Sal right. He combed the kinks out of Sal's dyed blonde hair and made tasteful wardrobe suggestions that would broadcast Sal's cool. "This surfing shirt is dope. These cargo shorts hide your Skeletor knees." At feeding time, besides the leaking incident, Michael had efficiently handled Sal's tube, priming the pump with distilled water, ensuring the pump was set to click, 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 slow enough so Sal didn't puke, confirming his formula was neither too cold nor too warm, and providing moderately entertaining commentary during their long shifts at the cafeteria table. Michael even got Sal eating orally, taking a few actual bites of ice cream, something he rarely did since the feeding tube. And Michael expertly changed his diaper, plucking the turd out of Sal's butt with a clean section of the diaper and thoroughly dabbing his nether regions with wet wipes, with an extra poof of baby powder to ward away diaper rash. And come bedtime, Michael put pillows under Sal's every gap and wedged in the stuffed animals between the bars so expertly that when Michael asked for a kiss before lights out, Sal grudgingly scraped his bottom lip against his teeth like, "Okay, not bad." Michael hadn't even felt the need to smoke the weed he'd smuggled into his pocket along with his one-hitter, because if Michael were being honest, he felt closer to Sal here at this camp, away from all the distraction and drama of home, than he had in years. But then, when everything was going right, Sal would pull away and do his black hole routine. He'd say "mama," which was not what Michael needed. Soon they'd go back across the bridge to whatever was waiting for them. Sal off to the facility, Michael off to his college on the other side of the country. Michael needed Sal to have the time of his life. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. That was fantastic. I think that what I'm going to do, where there's been so much for us to discuss and so many great readings and everything like that, we're down to our last 20 minutes, and I think that we can combine the advocacy and creativity and the ethics panel kind of together, because these issues overlap quite a bit. So I hope that that's okay with everybody. And so I'll read an extremely brief piece from my book, Monster, before we leap into that. Oscillation. We were all climbing slowly out of a flu-induced fog, through a long weekend of rain, oscillating heavy and light against the peaks and valleys of the roof lines, the skylights, and against the black asphalt of the quiet neighborhood street beneath my bedroom window. When I couldn't quite sleep and couldn't quite rouse myself, my thoughts moved on the road through the valley of the last decade. The tests, drugs, complications. With each failed attempt at diagnosis, another light changed from green to red with barely a flash of yellow in between. The brakes always went on hard. And as it happens with life at a certain speed, our habits of thinking, immutable as objects, continued traveling at speed, are freed temporarily from reality until, one by one, they lost velocity and stopped or crashed, as the case may be. The bumper of a car absorbs impact, bends or creases, gives with the incoming shock, and what doesn't sink in reverberates through the frame and passengers. While I lay in bed sick, I wondered if that's how an emotional shock works. An event arrives at a certain speed. Sometimes you face it, sometimes you look away, and it impacts the soft and hard matter of your body, yourself, the way you see things. Such as how I might come to understand whether Robert was constituted of his condition or not, and whether the world might come to accommodate him. Other people see the way an event strikes, but they don't see the shock reverberating through your frame. Because the impact has to go somewhere. It has to dissipate. And sometimes it takes a long time for that shock to travel through your psyche, animating different parts. And where it exits might surprise even you. And it may exit in many places over time. I lay there thinking that I was never sure if I were moving or standing still, moving under my own power, or moving with a forward momentum over which I had no control. Standing still, as in still standing, or merely stopped. I remember my favorite few miles of road in the state where I spent so many years of my life. A road I've driven often under different conditions, environmental and emotional, and in different seasons. Its blacktop descends sharply from an open plateau, broad meadows, through a forest and along a creek at the right. On the left are steep banks, a mountain wall. My memories of this road cast it mostly in dark and shadow, partly because the forest is quite thick, and partly because I've driven the road at night many times, once at 3 or 4 in the morning after one of the most significant realizations of my life. Route 125 in Vermont is steeply curved and sharply banked. One moment, momentum draws the car hard to the right, toward the creek, and then the car is drawn rapidly back toward the mountainside. And again, and again. In the dark, headlights catch the sharpest point of each curve, a series of harrowing hairpin shifts, illuminating whatever natural object would have been my demise before shifting back toward the road and relative safety. In the dark of my college years, I drove by watching the white line that marks the road's edge, not the center double yellow, and braking judiciously, but not continuously. At that point in my life, such driving could be fun in its own way. Let's just say I drove this road at intervals during a period when danger of all kinds seemed inviting rather than frightening. But I always felt a twinge of relief the moment the road straightened and leveled and poured itself into the village at the base of the mountain. The road oscillated between the poles of what could still happen and what hadn't, its energy fading in a village of frame houses that never seemed to change. So apologies to everyone about kind of combining the two closing panels. I wanted to kind of do a lightning round with the ethics, advocacy, and creativity bit here, because when I had always thought of myself as a writer, for example, and when Robert wanted to be an advocate, because he dragged me into this, I found myself immersed in disability advocacy and culture. And I began to realize that while as a writer, I'd strongly felt that language and words were my playing field, and that putting limitations on what I could or couldn't say was off limits. But as an advocate, I realized how important it is to maintain boundaries in terms of what I do say and how I do say it. So, and the same is true for writing that engages with other misrepresented or marginalized groups. So, what I would like us all to focus on at the moment is the ethics about writing about the lives that intersect with your own. Many, but not all writers are drawn to personal experience for their material. Some draw on their lives to develop characters, to flesh out metaphors. Some long to tell their own stories through essay or memoir. Yet, what are the ethical implications of writing about not only our own lives, but the lives of the people we care for, who are so intimately bound up with our own? So I believe there are important and necessary stories to tell about caregiving. For instance, in America, we're socialized to believe that dependency is kind of bad, while independence is what gives our lives value. Yet as caregivers, we experience life as interdependent. And as Alyssa Strauss writes in When You Care, the unexpected magic of caring for others, if we change our orientation to one of interdependence, seeing humans as a web of twisted roots, the pieces fall into place. A vision of interdependence allows for us to see how when we engage with other people, it helps us figure out who we are, what we want, and what we're doing here in this one and only life. Kind of shadows Mary Oliver there. And so to some extent, all literature and all stories engage with interdependence across all categories of human existence. So as we navigate this terrain as writers, we will inevitably make mistakes, as that too is part of being human. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to speak briefly about their own struggles to write ethically about the lives of people different from themselves. Let's learn from each other. And Brian and Grace, I know that you prepared a couple of different sets of remarks, so run with whatever makes sense to you. So why don't we just, go in alphabetical order, and we'll start with Sandra. That's okay with Sandra?
Sure. I want to clear space for those who are more, this is their focus, but what I will say briefly though is that having had the experience of writing a memoir, I often find that you can negotiate if you are in an open verbal relationship with someone, you can often negotiate the ethics of how they are portrayed. Obviously, if there's a lack of direct verbal communication, that complicates things. I was surprised because the areas that I found most sensitive ethically were the people who were slightly to the left or right of a story. I don't mean politically, but like maybe my sister in the first time around, maybe my husband's parents this time around. And even if a person who's the direct subject of a caregiving and therefore the narrative gives you permission, talking through the impact it might have on those figures is one of the huge ethical considerations and one of the areas where the fallout can be the most keenly felt. Yeah.
Fantastic. And actually, I said alphabetical order, but let's turn to Brian now, because I don't want to shortchange Brian.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think I don't know, it took me a long time to write the novel. I think part of that was because I felt like this sense of duty to get the story right, and was also aware of all the mistakes that had been made about representation in people with disabilities, especially someone like my brother. and also like he also doesn't appear in literature for the most part. And so it was like, well, who's going to do it besides me? And so, yeah, I felt that immense pressure and perfectionism. But I think, for advocacy, I think it's a little easier to do in nonfiction because you can be didactic. I mean, you can teach more directly, speak to the reader, anticipate misreadings. But with a fiction, you're kind of behind the veil of fiction, and I don't think literature is often good at like producing solutions like an advocacy or would or also like with advocacy you want to be very clear about what the message is, whereas literature points in all different directions. And so yeah, I think for me, I think about it as like writing with care is also writing with complexity, not simplifying people who for my own ends. And I think like if you're also writing about like I'm writing about from caregivers' perspectives. My parents are. I started kind of writing through my parents' points of view in the novel, but they became different people, and I think that was also care, and that I changed who they were and kind of imagined myself into their experiences. And so when they read it, they didn't think I had like busted them or anything, or it was sort of like, that wasn't them, but it was like they had been in a lot of those situations. And so, yeah, I think it's just a hard kind of thing to navigate, but and also especially because I also write on the comic mode. Irony also, like I'm not going to directly, come out and say like this is bad or good, or the absurdity sort of lends to the caregiving experience a lot of times. But yeah, I think it's a complex thing to navigate.
Yeah, I really appreciated your thoughts. I mean, I advocacy is to a certain extent about action, about getting people on board, creating a particular community, and literature. I think it's really important that literature be left to interpretation. So yeah, getting that balance in there with the right perspectives, the right respect, the dignity for the people who are involved. Something that I think that Brian did most successfully in his book. And let's move on to, I'll just now start picking people. Melissa, have anything to add?
Yes, I really appreciate what you said, Brian, and I think there's just so much complexity in it, but you seem to have done it so wonderfully in your novel. I can't wait to read it, the whole thing. I'm just thinking that as writers, we're in this position to feed the literary ecosystem to help readers maybe get a little closer to something that might be unknown to them. We have this ability to breed empathy and compassion, maybe at the least some level of understanding of what might be completely unknown to a reader out there. So in a way, we're creating an empathic relationship for a potential reader, to understand something that, I imagine we've all been in a public space where we're with a loved one with disability and people have no idea how to respond. They have no idea how to interact. They have no idea how to even pass us on the sidewalk. At times, it can be really dramatic. And so I look at what we're doing as a way to sort of invite people into some element of the experience. And I just want to quote one more tiny bit by Danusha Lamaris, who is this poet whom I admire so greatly because of the way she writes about her own experience as the mother of a child with disability. And she said, readers want to eavesdrop on another human being having a human experience, something important. People want to feel less alone. They want to feel accompanied. People turn to writing to gain a sense of how to survive intact with some kind of joy. How do you survive illness, loss, pain, strange, unexpected blessings? Eavesdrop on survival. We have minimal opportunities to hear how to survive.
Fabulous. And I see Patricia Sullivan's on the call, and she's the editor of an anthology of stories or essays, rather, Writers for Rare. in which one of my essays is featured about Rob's diagnosis. And I think that might be an anthology many people would be interested in, because it brings together just a tremendous number of perspectives, not just parents, but people with rare diseases and physicians and people from all other parts of the rare spectrum. And so there'll be links to that in the handout after the show. I was going to read from it originally, but it was a bit too long. So Grace, thoughts?
Sure. And so I mean, I actually think my approach to advocacy and writing is pretty similar in a lot of ways. And so I did advocacy around a number of issues related to children and disability for many years as an attorney. And for me, it really is kind of this rigorous questioning of, why am I interested in this particular issue or story? And, what lens am I bringing to it? And am I the right person to be telling this story in this way? Am I the right person to be leading this effort? And, if not, what might I have to say about something in a story, or how can I use whatever, platform I might have to get the people who need to be at the lead to the lead. And also just really think about, what don't I know? What assumptions might I be making about the story and the people involved in the subject matter? So for me, it really is this process of questioning and just asking myself, what is it that I'm trying to do here? And is this the kind of the best way for me to approach this? And am I the person to be approaching it in this way?
Excellent. Great thoughts. Sharon?
So before I shifted into full-time writing and editing, I ran a nonprofit that was an advocacy organization working on against apartheid in South Africa, and then on to fight AIDS. And so I learned a lot in that work about working in consultation and partnership with the people I was seeking to assist, and creating room for everyone to have a seat at the table, including myself as a ally. And writing has forced me, I mean, I think crossing identity boundaries is risky. And I also think not crossing identity boundaries, people never doing that, is incredibly risky, because then our creative worlds end up segregated. And I don't want to live in a segregated internal or external world. And I don't want my creative work to live in a internal or external segregated world. So it is risky, but I think what it requires is that we create work that's worthy of that risk. And it requires, I think, a lot of sensitivity and consultation, whether it's with sensitivity readers or the permission of someone you're representing, or however that goes. But I also think it raises distinct craft challenges. And sometimes when I get too paralyzed by the ethics questions, I try to focus in on the craft challenges, which are, things as simple as, if you're writing a piece, do you only identify the race of people? Like, where are you identifying things? Are you saying the Black man, but you're not saying the white woman? Are you saying the disabled boy, but you're not saying, the athletic? So for me, it's about looking at very specific craft challenges that writing across barriers raises. And there's a lot of them. And I don't think there's any one right answer. I know really brilliant writers who use another language and they put it in italics. And I know other writers who leave it out of italics. And some who define the foreign language and others who don't, and people who, there's so many different approaches to each thing. But I think the answer for me is that it has to be conscientiously done and not done on automatic. Because I think the more automatic we are in all these things, the more likely we are to fall into the pit of stereotypes. And so that's sort of been my issue. And then again, I mean, I'm a big believer in seeking permission if my work is in some way using somebody else's story, or in seeking input if I'm writing about something that, while I know about it, it's not my personal story. But I do think, it's finding that balance between what is freedom of expression and artistic license, and what is appropriation, and how to be an ally. And that's the other thing, is I think if we are crossing boundaries, it requires of us to be an even greater ally to the people that we are representing in our work. So for me, if I'm crossing race boundaries, that means that I have to do extra work in calling people's attention to writers of color or LGBTQIA writers, or whatever boundary you're crossing. So I think that's the other way that advocacy and creativity interface, is because as writers, I mean, and again, I agree with what, Brian and others of you said about literature's job isn't to present a clear case in the way that advocacy is, but I think it does require of us as artists, if we are in any way benefiting, getting attention for work that we've done that crosses boundaries, to be sure that the platforms we have are used to call attention to writers who might not get that same level of attention.
Thank you, Sharon. It's great. And there's a question in the chat. How do we protect the privacy of our loved ones while writing about our experiences of caring for them? And I see that Sandra has dropped in an answer here. Privacy is such a big and monolithic / intimidating word. What we assume constitutes someone's privacy may not match where their boundaries of privacy actually are. If it's possible to ask them, do. If they don't know the project exists and that they are in it, then recognize that the anxiety attached to telling them that may be telling them that
the writing project exists, right?
Yeah,
Like, way better.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
way better if they understand that this thing exists, separate
yeah,
from trying to talk to them about how they're in it. Yeah.
yeah. And I'd like to, I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that. Sharon, did you say?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
'Cause I have one thing to add at the
I
end
was
here.
just giving Sandra a thumbs up. I wasn't
Oh,
raising
okay.
my hand to speak.
Okay. So anyone else want to weigh in on this question? I guess, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I mean, I do write nonfiction as well, and so those are real issues, I guess. Like,
Mhm.
what do you need to to tell the story? Like, who's it serving? I think is it yeah, being careful what you reveal, depending on what's necessary. But I also think, sometimes, like, even getting permission doesn't absolve you from getting it right. Like, it has to be in the work. Just because you've, gotten someone's verbal agreement or not, the work is still the most important thing. So yeah, it's a complicated thing. And I think sometimes, like, I felt weird writing about, like, with Melissa, I have shower songs where I wrote about showering my brother and, like, showing him naked, like, in the piece. But then I'm like, is that my anxiety, or would he be concerned about that? I don't know. Like, that was just how he lived. And so yeah, I think it's a complicated thing for sure. I keep saying that, but
And then you see Sam responds, I think avoiding being self-serving. If you're doing the writing for accolades, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But I'm guessing if we're all here, we're not doing it for the wrong reasons. Yeah. And my thought about that question was that I talked to my son Rob about writing about him, and he had given me a thumbs up about it. And Rob does have some disabilities, and I explain things as carefully to him as I can. And I talked to him about the title of the book, and he actually liked it because I meant monster in all of its permutations, right? And in contemporary slang, monster is awesome and amazing, which is frankly, what Rob is. And also, at the time, I wanted to redirect the reader away from thinking that, oh my God, I'm calling my son a monster, because I'm not. So that's my tattoo on my shoulder in the back, which is of DNA. Robert has a very rare, extremely rare genetic illness disorder, and it took us 14 years to find a diagnosis for him. So I was completely immersed in genetics, and I came to think of DNA as this wild, shape-shifting, hydra or whatever that made each of us who we are. Because I came to learn that the evolutionary purpose of DNA is to create variation randomly. And that, for example, each of us sitting here, in this room, in this panel, and this earth, have at least 10,000 different genetic variants, some of which, cause issues, some of which just make us who we are, some of which might cause an issue if the right, environmental or genetic trigger comes up, who knows? So all of us are complicated and chaotic. And I also am, great lover of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, not in the typical pop culture mode at all, but because Shelley wrote this in a sense to cast shade on her husband Percy's abandonment of his own children. And so I think that part of the message, if you actually read the novel, is that people who refuse their duties to other people are immoral and even doomed. So those are some of the things that I was trying to get at, but I've come to believe that giving this title was probably a mistake, just because I think these popular misconceptions about Frankenstein are just too deeply ingrained in our culture for me to overcome them at all. So a better title, I think, would have been Matter. One of my nephews read my book and wrote me a long, admiring email afterward, in which he spoke, incisively about my repetition of the word matter, as then I wanted Rob's life to matter, which it does very much. So maybe I'll talk to my publisher and see if I can change it. But at any rate, I think we need to wrap up. It's been wonderful. We run a little bit over time. Thank you all for hanging in there in the audience. And so you'll get an email after the event with a link to the recording, as well as a link to a very substantive authors and resource guide. It's actually like 57 pages long, so happy reading, everybody. Lots of resources in there. And I like to close tonight with a short poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, whose house I'm sitting in. And I was introduced to her work by my grandfather when I was about 12, when I began to show some interest in poetry. So she's dear to my heart. The poem is entitled First Fig, and it's very short. And I think these lines will resonate with caregivers everywhere who understand what it takes to just keep going. My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But my foes, and oh, my friends, it gives a lovely light. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming. Hope that you got something out of this that will stay with you. And thank you to all the panelists and readers in Millay House. You are awesome. So glad to share this space with you. Good night. Good night, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing. Beautiful.
Thank you. So good to be with all of you.